Pari Luis Pari Gazıksırla Badatselner. Good morning. Welcome to St. Sarkis Church. I'm happy to see all of you here today. When I drove here this morning, it was snowing. I hope the snow stopped. I'm not sure what happened. Well, a little bit more snow. It doesn't harm us because there are some people who like the snow. Speaking of snow, last week, my friend and I'm not going to mention his name, but I'm just going to look at him. We went skiing and it was a fun day. And I had a pair of very tight gloves. And at the end of the day, when I was removing my gloves, I discovered that I didn't have my ring on my finger, my wedding band. And I'm like, yeah, I removed my gloves when we had lunch and maybe it dropped because this pair of gloves is very tight. And I asked the kids, did I have my ring this morning when we drove? And the kids were like, we don't know. So I called my wife and with the intention to ask her if I had left my wedding ring home on the nightstand. But as soon as I started the call, my son Avedis was like, don't tell mom, because if you have really lost your ring, that will make her very upset. So I said, yeah, you're right. So I started talking about random things. But on the way, all the way from, this was in Pennsylvania, 2 hours driving back, I'm thinking about my wedding band. So I went back home, and the first thing that I did, went to my bedroom, and there it was. My ring was there. I never wore my ring that day. So it's a tough feeling to lose something, and then you're looking for it. Have you found it? And the first thing that went to my mind that day was, I hope they have a good lost and found department. So if someone would find my ring, I could call them, because I rarely had any good experience with the lost and found. It's really bad. Almost always very bad. But this idea of losing and finding something is not something new. It's not something that we go through. It's something universal. It has been there since the beginning of times. And in the Gospel of Luke, we have a whole chapter about lost and found. And today we are dealing with that chapter, lost and found. So we have 3 parables that Jesus gives back to back. The first parable is about someone who has 100 sheep and he loses 1 sheep and he leaves the 99 behind and goes looking for the 1 lost sheep. And when he finds that lost sheep, he takes that sheep, puts the sheep on his shoulders, and comes back joyfully that he has found the lost sheep. The second parable is about a woman who had 10 coins and she ends up losing 1 coin. And she lights the lamp and starts swiping the floors, trying to find that coin that she had lost. And when she discovers the lost coin, she calls her friends and she rejoices and celebrates for the found coin. And the third, which is the most important parable in this sequence, is the parable of the prodigal son, or the merciful father, depending on how you look at it. The son who went astray and he came back. And my personal opinion is that this is one of the most beautiful stories that has ever been told. I'm sure all of you know the story. The father had 2 sons, and then one day the younger son went to his father and said, divide the inheritance. And he took his part and he went to a distant country. And while he was in that distant country, he squandered everything. And then he was hungry. He didn't have anything. He tried to find a job. He became a caretaker for the swine. And he was even trying to fill his stomach with the food that was designated for the pigs. But the pigs are greedy, I guess. They wouldn't give anything to him. And he realized that he was in trouble. He started thinking about home, thinking about the abundance that he had once upon a time when he was home. And he chose to go back home and to tell his father that he sinned against heaven and against the Father. He went back, and before he arrived, the father welcomed him, embraced him. He started the celebration. However, in this story, we have also an older brother who, when he comes back from the field, he's not happy to see that all that celebration. And he confronts his father and says, all this time I've been working hard and diligently for you, but you didn't give me anything. But when this son of yours came back, not my brother, but this son of yours, when he came back, after wasting everything, and the language that he uses is pretty graphic even for the gospel, is this how you treat him? But the father says, my son, this is your brother. Everything that I have is yours, basically. But this is your brother who was dead and he is alive. And this is one of the stories in the New Testament that is open-ended. There's no conclusion. Because this is the story of every one of us. And we need to find, how do we conclude this story? So, as a derhire, as a priest in the Armenian Apostolic Church, there are days when I look at the biblical narrative, what our church fathers have told us to read and reflect on. And sometimes I have a hard time thinking about, what am I going to talk about? What do I preach? But when it comes to this Sunday, this reading, I have always a lot to talk about. And it's really difficult for me to kind of discern what to say and what not to say. So if I say too much, you may yawn 3 times and I will get the signal. Okay? So there are 3 characters, and there are really important lessons that we can learn from each character. The first character, obviously, is the younger son. The younger son who goes away and basically squanders everything. I have 2 things to say about the younger son. And there are 2 lessons, obviously, that we can learn from him. The first lesson is that it's okay to make mistakes. I come from a culture where making mistakes was not accepted, where if you made a mistake, nobody would look at it and say, this is a learning opportunity. If you don't make mistakes, you will never learn. I come from an environment and a culture that was very rigid. Mistakes were almost non-tolerable. And sometimes I find myself as a parent kind of repeating that mindset with my children, with my environment. And I need to kind of pay attention to what I'm doing, because if we don't make mistakes, we will never grow. But sometimes the mistakes that we make, or what type of mistakes we make, they kind of matter. There are levels of mistakes. There's this famous saying, I think it comes from the Chinese culture, that goes something like this: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, to a certain degree it does, but there's a good chance that it can leave you permanently damaged or permanently disabled. So you don't want to take risks that are really terrible, that can have consequences that are irreversible. And that's why we need to use our wisdom. But I think in this parable, in the character of the younger son, there's something deeper that we can pay attention to. And the idea here is, what makes us happy? And how can we be happy? A lot of times, happiness comes from having our basic needs met. And our basic needs are what? We need food, and we need security that we are going to survive. This is like evolutionary. It's been with us throughout the centuries. The need for food and the security for survival. And sometimes we think that if we have more of these securities, the happier we're going to become. If we indulge and find more things that will give us pleasure, that will make us more happy. And this is where we usually fail. Because more food, more pleasure, and forgive me for saying this, more sexual experiences, because that is also part of our survival instinct, will not make us happy. There's only a certain level. We need that security. I'm not saying that that security is bad. But beyond that, having that security, there's no extra happiness that comes from just looking at a pantry that is full of boxes of pasta, and in my case also tuna cans, because I like tuna. That will not give us happiness. Happiness is not in having too much. At some point, if you have 3 cans of tunas or 6, you will manage. This is really what we fall into a temptation, and we think that happiness comes from having more. So this guy had enough. He had enough when he left home, when he took his part. But he discovered his misery when he realized that he is lonely. He started thinking about his father's home. He started thinking about the servants who had more than their needs. And this detail tells us something very profound. It tells us that happiness comes from finding meaning in life. And relationships matter. Relationships give meaning to our lives. And when we don't pursue having meaningful relationships in life, having that excessive material stuff is not going to help us. The second character is obviously the older brother. The older brother who was home, he never left, and he was the righteous person. And the way that he behaves is really very unique, very interesting. And there's a lot that we can learn from this guy. Things we learn what not to do from this person. And here's the first thing. This guy was generally a negative person. Like when you come home and somebody tells you that, hey, by the way, your brother, whom we thought that he was dead, he's alive. He came back. Why do you have to be negative about that? That's a good thing. Why can't you enjoy the fact that, hey, my brother's alive? Did he make a mistake? Sure. But he is alive. He's here. And I'd like to speak a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit longer about this son. There's a lot of negativity around us. I was listening to a podcast. The person was making a confession. He was like, I finally got to a place in my life where I can afford to travel first class. And then after a few times traveling first class, I started complaining that, the United Airlines first class is really not that good. And he caught himself. That, why am I being negative? Instead of focusing on the fact that I can have this experience in my life, why am I focusing on the negative? And sometimes if we are honest with ourselves, we see that we also do the same thing. Like some of you are thinking, I know that, but it's okay. You can tolerate that. Or there are so many other things that we, instead of looking at the positive things, we pick the negative and we focus on the negative. And sometimes we need to catch ourselves because that creates a bad vibe, bad environment. Nothing productive can happen when things are negative. The second problem that this guy had, it seems like everything was about him. He was diligent. He went and he worked. He did everything that his father asked him to do, but he couldn't see that somebody else was being celebrated. Maybe he was expecting that because he complained, you slaughtered the fattened calf. This is the only place in the entire scripture where fat comes under positive light, which is a good thing. That makes you feel good. So he complained that the calf was being slaughtered, and maybe he was expecting that calf would be slaughtered for his engagement party. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he was expecting that the father would say, you know what, Douglas, next week I'm going to have a party for you. Don't worry about it. And that's what we do as parents. A lot of times when we see one person who's upset, we try to tell them, don't worry, we're going to take care of this. But sometimes we need to stay with negative feelings. We need to know that not everything is about me. And it's okay for me to rejoice, to be happy, to see that somebody else is being celebrated. When we read the words of this guy, we see that he was angry because the first part of the text tells us he just squandered his money with his friends, or he squandered his money, period. But when we read the account of the brother, it's more embellished. He wasted all your money with prostitutes, says the brother. Yes, this is in the Bible. So he was angry with the way that his brother behaved. And this is something that we also experience. We look at somebody else's behavior and that makes us feel really angry. Look at this person. I can't believe this person. And we start feeling morally superior and criticizing whatever wrong we perceive that person is doing. And this is really important for us, again, to take a pause and ask the question, why this behavior, or why when I observe this behavior in somebody else, I am feeling this way? We usually externalize and we want that person to change their behavior. But when we look inside, we ask the question, why this is bothering me? That's where we find the answer. Maybe this guy also had a desire to go and explore just like his brother did, but he never gave himself that permission. He stayed put and he stayed loyal, and he was resenting the loyalty that he had, and he was being angry with his brother. So there's a lot that we can learn from this very deep, deep story. If this guy came to me for counsel in my office as a derhair, I would tell him, maybe you need to practice gratitude. Maybe you need to practice gratitude, and that will really help you. So what kind of gratitude can we practice? Genuine gratitude. Because there are types of gratitude that is not genuine. And we see that a lot on social media. For example, if this was happening today, the guy coming from the field with his filthy clothes could go live on Instagram and be like, look at me, I'm going to my brother's celebration, and I was working so hard that I didn't even have a chance to shower. I'm with my dirty, filthy clothes, but I'm so happy for my brother. That's not a genuine type of gratitude, because you're making it all about yourself. Basically, you're saying that I wasn't expecting him, but see, this is who I am. Or they could have taken pictures and posted on Facebook. See all the food that my dad has prepared for my brother? This is what we eat. This is who we are. I'm grateful that my brother came back. Again, this is not a genuine sense of gratitude. And by the way, young boys and girls, teenagers, and sometimes adults also, if that's what you're doing in life, you're wasting a lot of emotional resources. There's no any meaningful return from those efforts that you have on social media. I'm trying to make light of the situation, but I'm also aware that sometimes the decisions and the choices that some people around us make, they may have some negative impact. And we experience some genuine hardship because of the choices that people around us make. How do we deal with that? I say we need to be patient. Sometimes being patient is really an important thing. I spoke with a person who told me that when I first got married, my wife and I, we had a situation. And I tried to explain to my wife that whatever she was doing at that time was hurting us, was wrong. But my wife did not accept the feedback that I gave. And I accepted it. But in my heart, I was never happy with it. 25 years later, one day, out of the blue, the wife came and said, you know, I've been thinking about our journey together. And I know that when our relationship started, that thing that was bothering you and I was trying to minimize, I think I was wrong and you were right. So I hope that we can forget about that chapter or resolve that chapter in our journey together. Sometimes being patient and giving space to people to kind of go through the feelings and process things, it is really helpful. But the most important character in this story is the father, is the forgiving father who opened his arms and welcomes back the sinner. This story, my brothers and sisters, tells us about unconditional love. Unconditional love, which means that only because you are born in this family, only because you are my child, I love you unconditionally. There are things that you do I don't like, but that's a different story. That doesn't change the love that I have for you. And I'd like you to focus on one detail. The young son, on his way back, he started thinking, I'm going to go to my dad and I'm going to say, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I don't deserve to be your son. Call me one of your servants. Make me one of your servants. And the father was waiting for him. The father knew that one day his son is going to come back. And when he saw him, he started running. That's something that is not very much accepted in that culture of that day. Senior members of the community don't run. You know, they show their presence. I'm here. This guy started running. And I've been reading this story for decades now. But it caught my attention for the first time today. he hugged him, he kissed him, and then the son said, I have sinned against heaven and before you. So he forgave him before hearing his confession. And this is really an important detail, that the Father knows what's in our hearts. He doesn't need those extra words, extra gestures. As long as we make that U-turn, God is willing to welcome us. The younger son made a mistake, but he realized, and he made a genuine U-turn. The older son lived a rigid life, and he used his faith, his devotion as a weapon. Don't do that. Don't create rigidity in your lives. Leave room for compassion, whether that is self-compassion or compassion towards others. Սիրելի քույրեր եւ եղբայրներ, այսօր անարագի գիրագին է։ Մեկ վարյան գարչ բամը բիդեսամ երկրորդ արագի մասին։ Երբ գինը կգործընծնե իր մեկ արձատ տահեգանը, ջրակը գվարե եւ դունը ավլելու կսկսի։ Այսօր երկու հատ հայտնություն ունեցա սա։ Երկրորդ հայտնությունը հետեւյալն է։ Դարիներ ի վերասի գարտացած ենք, այս շարագանը երկած ենք, բայց այսօր արդու շարագանը երկած ադեն շարագանի մեջ բացատրությունը դրված էր աս մասին, որ գսե ջրակը վարելը կնշանակի Աստծո լույսը դանդ մեջ կբերես։ Եվ կեդինները ավլելը կնշանակի որ աղդոլությունը եւ մեղքը դուրս կնետես։ Գործվածը գտնելու համար Աստծո լույսը պետք ունենք եւ մեղքը եւ աղդոլությունը պետք է դուրս ավլենք։ Այն ադեն է որ Աստծո շնորհքը մենք կգտնենք եւ Աստծո շնորհքը մեզ գարաշնորհ է։ Կմաղթեմ որ ծեր մեծ բայացողության աշճամփորդությունը Աստծո հաճելի լա եւ շնորհքը միշտ վար մնա ծեր սրդերում մեջ։ Ամեն։